Hi everyone, welcome back. And today we are going to talk about AI, but we're going to talk about AI in a different way than I've talked to you before. We're going to bring in the aspect of data, we're going to bring in the aspect of knowledge graphs. And for that, we have a very special guest today, Ashleigh Faith, whom I met at LinkedIn Learning, I want to say about 6 months ago.
Yep,
Ashley,
about that.
is that right?
Yep.
About 6 months ago when she was recording a course on knowledge graphs and I was recording a course on generative AI strategy. And we thought how cool it would be for me to go on Ashleigh's YouTube channel. By the way, Ashleigh has a very insightful YouTube channel that you should definitely check out. I'll add the link in the description. We thought it would be great to bring her on my show and me to go on her YouTube channel and talk a little bit about AI from the two different lenses, one from a technical aspect of things, the data aspect of things, and other from the business aspects of things. So Ashleigh, for my audience and this audience in particular, that's more focused towards the business aspects of technology, what is the relation between AI and knowledge graphs?
Oh, that's a great one. I think it's important for folks at all levels to understand this synergy, to use old-timey business terms. Uh, the knowledge graph aspect. So you don't even need to worry about what is a knowledge graph. Think of it from data constraints or a data governance kind of perspective, where you can put constraints on your data. So in your use case, maybe you have to require that all customer data has at least one birth date or one purchase to be considered a customer. That's a rule for your business. AI doesn't know that. AI is a pre-trained model. It just knows things basically from the open web. So it doesn't understand your business context, doesn't understand how to translate your data into respectable and trustworthy answers. And so that's where the connection between knowledge graph and AI happens, where a knowledge graph in its structure puts forth these constraints that makes sure that your data complies with those constraints. And then if your AI is using it for, let's say, RAG grounding, so retrieval augmented generation, that's to supplement basically like what your AI is doing out of the box. You want it to understand your organization, and a knowledge graph is a good way of doing that. And a lot of research out there is coming out, one of which we can link down below if anyone is interested in reading it. Adding knowledge graph into your AI is shown to decrease hallucinations by 46% in some
Wow.
studies. So it's important, and a lot of people are starting to pick up on this.
And that's especially because as you start fine tuning your AI models, as you start thinking about AI really giving you the kind of data and the insight that you require it to give, because that's how most of us use AI right now, right? We are all on chat GPTs, different kind of LLMs, trying to figure out how AI can best solve our problems, provide us insightful inputs. Having those constraints and those parameters will basically enhance the quality of the data that's behind it so that we can leverage that data to make the right decisions.
Yes, exactly.
While we are talking about data, we have to talk about data challenges with AI. We all know it from a business perspective,
Mhm.
from a technologist perspective. Walk us through some of the challenges.
Oh boy. Well, I'll avoid the most obvious, which is AI training. A lot of people don't have training in AI. If they do, it's more like traditional machine learning, not necessarily large language models, the LLMs that are out there now. That's prompt engineering. Those are things that a lot of folks are struggling with as far as training perspective. There's also a cultural shift. A lot of folks, they don't know what LLMs are capable of, and so they either use them incorrectly and they're over architecting something where an LLM doesn't necessarily need to be used in that situation, or they don't know where an LLM would be useful to be used. But I would say two main big data issues. The first is often overlooked, and that is entity resolution. If you are putting a prompt into an AI and you are asking, what was the latest score for Michael Jordan?
Mhm.
Does it understand? Do you mean Michael B. Jordan, the actor? Do you mean Michael Jordan, the basketball player? Do you mean Michael Jordan, the random customer that's in your database? Entity resolution is one of the critical pieces to getting your AI to be more accurate and to give you better insights. But so many people often overlook that aspect. A big reason is because their own customer data is kind of a mess. And that's a problem. I would say, so that's one major issue. And then the second is somewhat similar to that, and that is because so many people have so much dispersed data across many different databases or pieces of their organization. There's not a lot of consistency in their data, and I'm not ever expecting data to be super consistent, but an example of this, tying back to entity resolution, if you have 5 entities all with the same name, and 2 of those entities have really robust metadata associated with them, you know, their address, you know, the last time they visited, you know, all of these things, but the other entries have very thin data. Maybe they just have one purchase agreement, maybe they have one supply ID, something like that. You don't know if that behavior can be tied to the other. So that entity resolution isn't going to be as successful even if you can figure it out, because your own internal data is kind of scattershot. So, you know, I hate to be the person that says, well, your data needs to be better, but that's it does. Now, AI can help with that. A lot of AI has been used to do better ETL, to do, you know, stress test on data itself and suggest improvements. But it's a long journey. And I think when you shortcut it and just say, yeah, I'll just throw an AI onto it, these will bite you in the butt.
And you bring up such an important point, because as a business leader where I have led multi-$100 business units, I've always seen that, you know, everybody wants leaders to be data driven, right? But there's no data behind, right? There's no
Yeah.
reliable, trustworthy data behind. And I know that I did a keynote for Informatica not too long ago, and we talked about some of these pieces. And every single leader has told me that their data is unreliable. Data exists in various sources. It cannot talk to each other. Simple things that you might not even think about, like, for example, customer last name, right? One data set might call it customer last name, the other one might call it just the last name. And then suddenly those data sets do not work for each other because the column headers are different. Something as basic as that makes data unreliable unless somebody's in the back end working through this and mapping those columns.
Yeah.
Then there are data silos, obviously, that exist. So all those elements, and people have high hopes, by the way, Ashleigh, from business leaders that I'm talking to nowadays, that AI is going to solve their problem around this.
No,
Let's just break that
AI is
myth for
going to
them.
exasperate the problems. Yeah, I mean, you know, in that same vein, though, I think that the challenge, and I have been working in this space for well over a decade, longer than that, much longer than that. And anytime you start to talk about a data cleanup project, all business leaders go, how are we going to do that? All that data is tied into all these different systems, and we depend on it to come in this way. And you know, the pipelines are brittle, and you know, if you change this one thing, nothing will work. Yeah, 100%. So I love it, because our previous talk that we did on my channel, you were talking a lot about always start with the problem.
Yeah.
And the same goes with data cleanup. Start with the problem. What data do you need to solve that problem? You don't need to clean up all your data. You don't need to go in and add all this data governance and go like overkill. That would be lovely, but it's not going to get you a high ROI right away, because you're just cleaning up for cleaning up's sake. And while, you know, the little data hoarder in me wants all data to be clean and lovely and beautiful, it's not realistic. So instead, start with the data you know you need for that specific use case. Start small, which I know, Rashim, you said in our talk together on my channel. And that's where you start with your data cleanup and your data governance. Or if you're doing a knowledge graph, you know, you're talking about constraints and, oh, I don't know what a knowledge graph is. First of all, I have a whole LinkedIn learning course on that. But even outside of that, you don't need to do this big giant thing. Just do what is the most critical report or query that you have at your organization that you use quite often? Just start with that and try it out, test it out, see what works, see if you need any of these things. If not, you're okay.
And start where you are. That's another
Yeah.
big piece, right? I often get asked this question when I talk about having robust data. Rashim, how many years should we go back and start fixing this? And the reality is that if there's not a use case that requires you immediately to fix all that data, don't worry about
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
Start where you are. Build those parameters in such a way, have a holistic view of what your tech stack looks like, your ERP systems, your
Mm.
CRMs, everything else, and just try to build that bridge between
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
break those data silos, and start from where they are.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, actually, as we talked about in the previous episode, on your channel, AI is here to stay. It's not going away, right? You're going to need that data.
Yeah.
The sooner you come to a realization and start working on cleansing that data, making sure that you have the right data sets, it's
Mhm.
going to help you in your AI journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that you can also use knowledge graph for. We were talking about using the constraints, which is more of a preemptive when you're putting data into a knowledge graph and then using the AI to then consult the knowledge graph, and then you have more trustworthy data that complies with what your organization defines things as. Also works the other way, where if you already have a bunch of data, you can use some data techniques to understand, okay, I don't have a what is our rule? Like, let's all be honest, we don't always know what our business rules are.
Yeah.
So if you need to figure that out, if you need to figure out what are these constraints, AI can actually help you. There's something called a conceptual knowledge graph.
Mhm.
And what you can do, you can use something called graph rag, and you can point it at your data sets and your content, and it will create a graph based on what it finds. Now, unlike a lot of other people, that is not where you end your story. That's actually just where you start your story. A lot of people just say, great, got a knowledge graph. I don't need anything else. No, it's still just an AI generated graph. It doesn't understand your use case, your definitions. But what you can do is use that to understand what are the constraints. So if you start to see that everybody that is defined as a customer seems to have these parameters in common, those are probably some business rules. Write them out, check with your business leaders. It doesn't have to be written out in code, just write it out as an if-then statement
Yep.
and see if it checks the logic. And if it does, then you can go into the formal knowledge graph and all of those other things. But I think that that's where a lot of people struggle, is if they don't have experience in knowledge graph, they don't know what their business rules are, or maybe it's like in these little pockets. Let the data speak for itself. And usually it will tell you a very confusing story, and that's okay. But then you can take that and check with your actual stakeholders and figure out the noise from the nuggets, right? And just take those nuggets, and then you can use them.
So, actually, there are a lot of product management folks who are watching this today. There are a lot of adjacent technology leaders who are watching this today. There are business leaders watching this episode today. If they really had to make sure that we're capturing the right kind of data and we're using the data in the right way for AI, what are some of the specific questions that they should be asking their engineers, their product development teams? How should they ensure that those development teams have the right kind of information that they need to be able to capture data or provide mechanisms to capture data in the manner that serves the business correctly?
Well, it goes back to that use case. Take take a use case, figure out who is working in that use case, what
Mhm.
queries they run. Oftentimes it's going to be, well, so and so does that every once in a while, and they have this weird query. That's yet another place. So I'm trying to add in places where you can use AI that makes sense in a general space.
Mhm.
AI is actually really great at looking at a bunch of queries that you have and rewriting them to make them more efficient. and you still need to check them. You still have to make sure that the output that it is suggesting makes sense to you. But that's how you kind of assemble, like a lot of people that are getting into like data catalogs and things like that, like big data governance, big data catalogs. They try to like reinvent the world, get everything into the data catalog. And I'm always like, just start with the stuff you really know you need right away. Like, do you want everything in there? Yeah, you do. But again, if you look at those queries, you look at that business case, and you figure out what data is it consulting,
Mhm.
that's what you start with first. And a lot of the time when you're working, if you're a product manager, you don't know who to go and talk to,
Yes.
right? So a big, how do you know that's a common use case? Is it an email that automatically gets generated? Is it a dashboard that somebody has somewhere? Is it like there's all these ways that you can figure out why is this something that people care about? And a way to do that is like an ethnographic study where you just do interviews with your stakeholders and you say, okay, look, why is this an issue? Why is this a concern? Why is this important to us? And you'll start to get these nuggets of information. Sometimes you'll get, well, here's these data sets, here's these dashboards, here are these people, and here are my problems, or here is the department that I need this for. Or, oftentimes, you find out that there are multiple queries that are all doing the same thing. It's just everybody is in a different department and has different tables that's representing the same thing. In that case, you can see what you can do with a canonical model to tie them all together, and then you only have one query. Or you can use your AI better because it can now go across all those data sets. But yeah, it's really working hand in hand with your stakeholders, really understanding and listening. Like there are so many times that I just do what's called a think aloud, where I am recording a session or I'm typing it out if you're not allowed to record. What is that business stakeholder or that product person or that customer, what are they doing when they're interacting with something and they need to find information? Because that's what we're all trying to do, right? We're finding information, we're trying to do analytics and watching how they do it and asking questions. Well, why did you do that? Why did you ask this person? And as you understand the process, you'll start to tease out the different applications, data sets, people to then start to create that ecosystem and then tackle it from there.
Yeah, and it's, we sometimes get so consumed in the templates that are available, the PRDs
Mhm.
and the MRDs and everything else. And I think it calls for a more collaborative
Yeah.
approach where you talk an engineering lead, a product development leader in terms of what is the business problem that I'm trying to solve? How is
Hmm.
the user going to use it? Why are we capturing this data? And
Hmm.
how am I, as a product manager, I, as a business leader, going to use this data to really make business
Yeah.
decisions, right?
Yep.
Oftentimes, and I've seen those requests go in from my teams as well, when they go in to the leaders who are pulling that data, the context is missing. And without
Hmm.
that context, without having that holistic picture, you're not going to get the data that you're going to get because you think you need these 5 fields pulled
Yep.
out and projected in a certain manner. You might actually get a better view with 10 other fields that
Yeah.
can bring things into perspective. And as we talked about in the previous episode too, Ashleigh, that we did for your channel, where we talked about really it's about understanding, bringing AI and humans together, using the critical skills, the power
Yeah.
skills, problem solving skills, and tying it back to the hard skills that AI can
Yeah.
bring in. That's where the magic happens.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the things that I learned at a previous job that is a pretty well-known thing that a lot of people picked up because that company, is well known for doing this. I find it so valuable when you're doing these things. Really encourage and challenge the people you're talking to describe the problem or what they're using without talking about the technology.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard. Don't talk about the solution. That is so difficult to do. And if you state it up front, just like say, hey, when you start to bleed into that space of solutioning, I'm going to pull you back just so you know, just so you're not offended, because it will continue to happen, because so many people are just, they're so used to how something is already being done.
Yep.
Or they'll say, well, I need this because of, oops, mess with my mic a little bit there. They'll say, you need this because of, and then they'll talk about some constraint that they have in a system or with a stakeholder or something else, where it's like, well, that's not why you're actually doing it. That's just a legacy thing. And oftentimes, like when you stop talking about the solutioning already, you'll start to realize that there are things that people are doing that don't need to be done anymore. And a lot of it is a legacy where somebody somewhere told them they had to do it. And so they keep doing it and they have no idea why.
And sometimes the solution is very simple.
Yes.
It's extremely simple as opposed to something being really complicated. And the example that often comes to mind um, is that when people notice that people who are going to go in the space are not going to be able to use ink pens, and the
Mm-hmm.
ballpen point pen was invented, it was a simple solution, while other scientists were looking at very complicated solutions to figure out how to make the ink pens work rather than
Yeah.
thinking about ballpoint pens being able to be used.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what sometimes it is. Sometimes you have to step away from what already exists
Yes.
and start thinking about, if I was going to solve this problem afresh, how
Mm-hmm.
would I solve this?
Yeah.
But that also requires people to have a deeper understanding of the problem,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And which is something I think we've lost over years in certain ways, right?
Yeah.
We focus on, when we talk about product market fit, we think about how the product is going to fit in the market, as opposed to what is the problem that we are going to solve that is with this product.
Yeah. Yep.
And ultimately, it comes down to having that strong relationship between the business and the technology teams
Yeah.
to be able to build something that works.
Yeah. And I'll just say this to the audience as a cautionary tale. I have done a lot of what Rashim is saying. And sometimes what happens is you'll have stakeholders that they invented the solution that's in place, or
Yes.
they are the reason the solution that's in place has to be the way that it is. And they oftentimes will be counterintuitive or counteract what you're saying. And don't lose heart. Don't lose heart is what I'll say, because that is usually because that is what they're comfortable with. That is, their baby. If they were
Yes,
the ones who
yes.
built it or came up with it, and you have to be. Depending on your culture that your organization has, you either need to drag them along, which I'm not a fan of, or you really need to have that empathy and say, wait a minute, okay, so they put so much of their blood, sweat, and tears into this thing. How can I bring them along for the ride as part of the solution, not part of the problem? And it's so tough. I've had folks in this situation tell me, "Oh, that's great, Ashleigh, but that's a very academic solution. Like that's just green field. We can't do that because of all these problems." And it's like, understood, but until you start to think about the problem in a different way, you're gonna just keep what you have. You can make small
And
improvements, but you're not really gonna change.
although oftentimes what I've seen, Ashley, is these kind of leaders who are very passionate about what they have built are also very passionate about their customers,
Yeah.
and bringing them back to, rather than focusing on the product that they have built or the solution that they have built, taking that conversation back to customer and being more customer centric
Mm-hmm.
really helps drive the conversation forward.
Mm-hmm.
And having them see um, the new way of doing things as an evolution of their product, as opposed to a replacement of that product. So that's why I talk a lot about storytelling approach and how you
Yeah.
communicate on my channel,
Mhm. Mhm.
because it boils down to that, like what
Yeah.
you did in your previous roles and how you turned things around with these business leaders was less about technology and more about how you were as an empathetic leader,
Yeah.
having those conversations with them, still keeping their ego intact in a certain way
Yeah. Yeah.
and driving them close to the mission, the
Yeah.
purpose why they had built the product. And that is when I talk about in the context of AI, that is a skill that AI is not going to be able to replicate. That is where
Absolutely.
the humanizing factor,
Yes.
that AI human collaboration will come in. And I really think that being human is our biggest superpower that
Yeah.
is going to help us in this AI journey as you think
Yeah.
about.
Absolutely. And I will say another tip on that though is encourage your technology teams to think of the customer. They don't
Yes.
always do that. And so when you're talking about that narrative, I'm a very big fan of that as well. But you have to make sure that you always put the customer as the lead in that story for your technologists, because it's certainly not everybody, but so often when you get into the technology, you get excited. You're like, oh, this is cool. I can do this. I can do that. But at the end of the day, you always have to bring it back. How is this going to impact our customer? How is this making our customer more joyful, more excited, more, satisfied, whatever it is that you're measuring? And I will say that unfortunately, a lot of technologists, because they are so much farther behind the wall between what the technology is and the customer that the user has, it's sometimes there's very little oversight in like the two bodies. So if you are on the PM side, if you are a leader of some sort that is working on one or both of these sides, like be the bridge. I oftentimes I'm translating tech speak for the PMs or the customers and vice versa, like on the other side. So especially in the knowledge graph side of the house that I work in most of the time, you have to translate the real world scenarios, real world terms, the real behaviors into then what is put into code. And so oftentimes you are always becoming that bridge. And that's where that empathy, being able to listen, being able to really, hear folks out and, put your own pride and ego to the side for a little bit to listen and then help. Somebody once asked me, what is, like one of the top skills? And you were talking about being human. I would add, be a facilitator. There are tons of courses and tips out there on being a facilitator. In this space, it is so critical. If you can bring people together, you will get things done faster, you will be more efficient, people will be happier, and you will find the better solution if you can then just
And you will,
facilitate.
because you're bringing that diversity of thought into the conversation,
Yeah,
right? Lived experiences. And today, as you create solutions, we live in a diverse world where people have their own set of challenges. So, bringing that diversity of thought will always help you build a better solution.
absolutely. Absolutely. You got
So,
to get the
Ashley, if you
voices
had
in
to,
there.
so if you had to wrap it up,
Hmm.
one piece of advice, what would it be?
Well, if you are working in AI and you're trying to develop strategy, or you're getting into the actual technology of it, um, again, that empathy is so important because a lot of people on both sides of the house are scared. They're scared that they either don't know enough or they know too much, or their solution is no longer valid, their specialness is not as special. There's a variety of things that are very human about this that is not so fun. And so if you go into it and really, if you start to see people reacting in a certain way that's very strongly, either positive or negative, asking and maybe just pulling people aside, don't do it in a giant meeting, pull people aside and just really understand their perspective, I think does wonders. There are so many times that I'm like butting heads with somebody for some reason I can't understand. And then I pull them aside and we talk about it. And I'm like, oh, there was a miscommunication or there was a misunderstanding about how something works. All of those things are valid no matter what you're doing, but in AI specifically, it is so critical because there are so much information out there. People are trying to learn on the fly. Things are changing so much. there's just a lot to this, and just having that empathetic leader, collaborator, really understanding that facilitation is so critical.
Yeah. This was so much fun, Ashley. I wish we could do more of these. We should
Yeah,
actually do more of these.
absolutely. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.